It seems to me when you're talking about national disasters, the one that you hear about that concerns folks most in South Central is this notion that we would have a major earthquake in the middle of a winter day when it's 20 below, and we'd have a significant loss of power, and our roads would be cut off because of the earthquake. How could we possibly deal with a scenario like that?
Well, you've looked at some of the initiatives that the governor has as far as being able to have a strategic reserve, per se, for Alaska. And the first two components is water and power. So the influx of water purification units and or equipment, and also power generation. So that's the very first thing. Sheltering would be next. So coordinating and facilitating large areas that would be able to survive the earthquake, identifying those, and have those as rally points where we could house, shelter, secure, and then feed the population that is required to move into there should a disaster of that magnitude occur.
So we have these shelters now, and they're
We've identified facilities. School district have schools. That's a great sheltering opportunity. Out there on base, we have large hangars that we could coordinate with the active duty.
And they have generators and all that.
Generators from the military, the National Guard, from the state. Again, across the board, we have identified those resources that we would need to bring to bear. The governor's initiative to try to secure food that would sustain 40,000 people for up to 7 days.
Yes.
Because again, our lifeline is going to be that movement of resources and equipment out of, say, Washington State. But if that's disrupted by synchronizing a volcano or some other, that airflow wouldn't be able to be. We do need to be self-sufficient and be able to sustain ourselves. So Alaska is preparing and exercising those scenarios very closely.
What do individuals need to do their part in preparation for something like that?
That is a great question. That's where on our websites and across the board, individual preparing a kit, preparing those resources that you can use individually. Also coordinating with your family. Get a list and identify specific tasks which your families need to do in order to be accountable and also be part of the solution so that you can survive, you can get your family to coordinate their safety and account for them.
Yeah, you can never really, though, be fully prepared. Obviously, we saw
Absolutely.
that with Katrina. I know that I grew up in New Orleans, and there was always talk about if the hurricane hit just perfect, that the whole city would flood. And we saw that there was just so much you could do in a situation like that. And I would assume that if we ever did have a major earthquake on that worst case scenario, it would be a pretty bad situation. But obviously, we do what we could, right?
Well, and we prepare and practice for those.
Yeah.
There's a new term as far as a complex disaster, a complex event where multiple states are involved, a large segment of the populations, and people are rehearsing and practicing that.
Yeah.
When you look at the preparedness, we had a small event in Cordova. Within 18 hours after the request, we had National Guardsmen on location and shoveling snow and addressing that. Hurricane Irene, the request in the East Coast for assistance from outlying areas that weren't affected, Alaska, 18 hours from the time the request came in to the time we had C-17s en route with aircraft, helicopters loaded on board, and personnel. So the response is very quick.
How big of a deal is it that there's only one way out of Anchorage? Is that a big deal?
One way out.
Well, in other words, really...
From the valley area?
Well, no, the only way you can really get out of Anchorage is if you go north up the Seward High, or up the Glen Highway. And so is that a big deal? That's really, there's only, in other words, if we had a Kinnicon Bridge, there'd be two ways out. But everybody, if for some reason everybody had to evacuate Anchorage, it would just basically be one road.
Well, you've got
is that a dangerous situation?
You've got South Road going south.
Yeah, but I suppose.
You've got rail, you've got different access points.
Yeah.
Those scenarios, the critical areas we've identified, bridges are critical component.
Yes.
And we now have multiple bridges across the Eagle River, but even they're subject to damage.
Yeah.
And we make plans to try to address that. How do we get in temporary structures that would address transportation needs?
I guess what I'm getting at, Elizabeth and I are fans of the Kinnicon Bridge, and from someone who is involved in emergency preparedness, would it be beneficial to have another outlet for a city of 290,000 people as opposed to one?
Dan, the answer to that is always yes. Anytime the resources, additional capability and capacity, it's critical to any community.